The Lost History of the Cairo Pyramids, Much More to be Discovered, Part 2 of 2. This is a copy of the labyrinth of the Egyptian underground pyramid under the pyramids of the Giza Plateau. The Egyptian labyrinth, this is a construction diagram by Athanasius Kircher, copperplate engraving, Tourist Babel Sive Archaeologica, Amsterdam, made in 1679. And this is another image of the underground city of the Giza Plateau. Description d'Egypte, Paris, 1809. And you can see it's a huge underground city underneath the Giza Plateau. And as we can see here, it's actually 2 levels, 12 palaces, and no less than 3,000 chambers. At the time of Herodotus' visit, there were 2 large pyramids with colossal seated figures on the top in the center of Lake Moeris. This is a pre-1851 engraving in one of those pyramids. And so we continue with this mysterious underground city, labyrinth, tunnel system, subway system underneath the Giza Plateau. In part 1, we ended with archaeologists made another major discovery at that time. They said while originally exploring in the area in 1935, Dr. Selim Hassan said, "We're hoping to find some monuments of importance after clearing out this water. The total depth of these series of shafts is more than 40 meters or more than 125 feet deep. In the course of clearing the southern part of the subway, there was found a very fine head of a statue, which is very expressive in every detail of the face. According to a separate newspaper report of the time, the statue was an excellent sculpted bust of Queen Nefertiti, described as, quote, a beautiful example of that rare type of art inaugurated in the Amhotep regime, end quote. The whereabouts of that statue today are unknown." The report also described other chambers and rooms beneath the sands, all interconnected by secret and ornate passageways. Dr. Selim Hassan revealed that not only are there inner and outer courts, but they also found a room they named the Chapel of Offering that had been cut into a huge rock outcrop between Campbell's tomb and the Great Pyramid. In the center of the chapel are 3 ornate vertical pillars standing in a triangular-shaped layout. Those pillars are highly significant points in the study, for their existence is recorded in the Holy Bible. The conclusion drawn is that Ezra, the initiated Torah writer, this was around 397 BC, knew the subterranean layout of passages and chambers at Giza before he even wrote the Torah. That underground design was probably the origin of the triangular-shaped layouts around the central altar in the Masonic Lodge. In the Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus wrote in the 1st century that Enoch of the Old Testament fame constructed an underground temple consisting of 9 chambers. In a deep vault inside one chamber, with 3 vertical columns, he placed a triangular-shaped tablet of gold, bearing upon it the absolute name of the deity God. The description of Enoch's chambers was similar to the description of the Chapel of Offering under the sand just east of the Great Pyramid. An anteroom, much like a burial chamber, but undoubtedly a room of initiation and reception, was found higher up in the plateau close to the Great Pyramid and the upper end of the sloping passage, cut deep into rock on the northwest side of the Chamber of Offering, between the Chamber of Offering and the Great Pyramid. In the center of the chamber, there is a 12-foot-long sarcophagus of white Turach limestone and a collection of fine alabaster vessels. The walls are beautifully sculptured with scenes, inscriptions, and emblems of particularly the lotus flower. The description of alabaster vessels and emblematic lotus flower have remarkable parallels with what was found in the temple workshop on the summit of Mount Sinai, Horeb, by Sir William Petre in 1904. Additional anterooms, underground rooms, chambers, temples, and hallways were discovered, some with vertical circular stone support columns, others with wall carvings of delicate figures of goddesses clothed in beautiful apparel. Dr. Salim Hassan's report describes other magnificently carved figures and many beautifully colored friezes. Photographs were taken, and one author and researcher who saw them, Rosicrucian H. Spencer Lewis, recorded that he was deeply impressed with the images. It's not known where these rare specimens of art and relics are today, but somewhere rumored to have been smuggled out of Egypt by private collectors. The foregoing particulars are but a few contained in Dr. Salim Hassan's extensive report that was published in 1944 by the government press in Cairo under the title Excavations at Giza, 10 volumes. However, there is just a mere fragment of the whole truth of what is under the area of the pyramids. In the last year of sand clearing, workers uncovered the most amazing discovery that stunned the world and attracted international media coverage. The city deep in huge natural cavern. Archaeologists in charge of the discovery were bewildered by what they had unearthed and stated that the city was the most beautiful plant they had ever seen. It is replete with temples, pastel-painted pleasant dwellings, workshops, stables, and other buildings including a palace, complete with hydraulic underground waterways. It has a perfect drainage system along with other modern amenities. The intriguing question that arises out of this discovery is, where is that city today? Its secret location was recently revealed in to a select group of people who were given permission to explore and film the city. It exists in a huge natural cavern system below the Giza Plateau that extends out in an easterly direction under Cairo. Its main entry is from inside the Sphinx, with stairs cut into rock that lead down to the cavern below the bedrock of the Nile River. The expedition carried down generators and inflatable rafts and traveled along an underground river that led to a lake 1 kilometer wide. On the shores of the lake nestles the city, permanent lighting is provided by large crystalline balls set into the cavern walls and ceiling. A second entry into the city is found in stairs leading up to the basement of the Coptic church in Old Cairo. Drawings from narratives of people living in the earth, quote unquote, given in the books of Genesis, Jasher, and Enoch. It is possible that the city was originally called Gigal. Film footage of the expedition was shot at a documentary called Chamber of the Deep, was made and subsequently shown in private audiences. It was originally intended to be released, the footage, to the general public, but for some reason it was withheld. A multifaceted spherical crystalline object the size of a baseball was brought up from the city, and its supernatural nature was demonstrated at a recent conference in Australia. Deep within the solid object are various hieroglyphs that slowly turn over like pages of a book when mentally questioned to do so by whoever holds the object. That remarkable item revealed an unknown form of technology and was recently sent to NASA in the USA for analysis. Historical documents recorded that during the 20th century, staggering discoveries not spoken of today were made at Giza and Mount Sinai, and Egyptian rumors of the discovery of another underground city within a 28-mile radius of the Great Pyramid abound. In 1964, more than 30 enormous, multi-leveled subsurface cities were discovered in the old Turkish kingdom of Cappadocia. That's in Derinkuyu. I'll leave a link below for my video on that. 30 levels. One city alone contained huge caverns and rooms and hallways that archaeologists estimated supported as many as 2,000 households, providing living facilities for 8,000 to 10,000 people. Their very existence constitutes evidence that many such subterranean worlds lie waiting to be found below the surface of the earth. We also have many of those and Hopi legends concerning the underground dwellings of the ancient Hopi Indians. Now, excavations at Giza have revealed underground subways, temples, sarcophagi, and one interconnected subterranean city, and validation that underground passageways connected the Sphinx to the pyramids is another step towards proving that the whole complex is carefully and specifically thought out. And again, we have to remind everybody, this is pre-flood civilization. Then we have the official denials. Because of Dr. Selim Hassan's excavations and modern space surveillance techniques, and the records and traditions of the ancient Egyptian mystery schools that claim to preserve secret knowledge of the Giza Plateau, all rose to the highest degree of acceptability. However, one of the most puzzling aspects of the discovery of underground facilities at Giza is the repeated denial of their existence by the Egyptian authorities and academic institutions. And why so? So persistent are their refutations that the claims of the mystery schools were doubted by the public and suspected of being fabricated in order to mystify visitors to Egypt. The scholastic attitude is typified by a Harvard University public statement of 1972. It said, "No one should pay any attention to the preposterous claims in regard to the interior of the Great Pyramid or the presumed passageways and unexcavated temples and halls beneath the sand in the Pyramid District made by those who are as associated with the so-called secret cults or mystery societies of Egypt and the Orient. These things exist only in the minds of those who seek to attract the seekers for mystery, and the more we deny the existence of these things, the more the public is led to suspect that we are deliberately trying to hide that which constitutes one of the great secrets of Egypt. It's better for us to ignore all these claims and merely deny them. All of our excavations in the territory of the pyramid have failed to reveal any underground passageways or halls, temples, grottos, or anything of the kind, except the one temple adjoining the Sphinx." End quote. So it was well enough for scholarly opinion to make such a statement on the subject, but in preceding years, official claims were made stating that there was no temple adjoining the Sphinx. The assertion that every inch of the territory around the Sphinx and pyramids have been explored deeply and thoroughly was disproved when the temple adjoining the Sphinx was discovered in the sands and eventually opened to the public. On matters outside official policy, there appeared to be a hidden level of censorship in operation, one designed to protect both Eastern and Western religions. And also, we remind everybody that there is a second Sphinx, it appears, parallel to the Sphinx that we know now, and it has not been unearthed yet. So there's a lot more to be discovered. Concerning the ever-burning lamps, we know that they didn't have torches inside the pyramids because of the fact that there's no soot on the walls. So they had the ever-burning lamps. And despite of amazing discoveries, the stark truth is that the early history of Egypt remains largely unknown and therefore unmapped territory. It is not possible then to say precisely how many miles of underground passageways and chambers beneath the Giza Plateau were lit, but one thing is for sure. Unless the ancients could see in the dark, which is probably not so, the vast subterranean areas were somehow illuminated. The same question is addressed of the interior of the Great Pyramid, and Egyptologists have agreed that flaming torches were not used, for ceilings had not been blackened with residual smoke from the soot. From what is currently known about subsurface passageways under the Pyramid Plateau, it's possible to determine that there are at least 3 miles of passageways, 10 to 12 stories below the ground level, 10 to 12 floors underneath. That's amazing. Both the Book of the Dead and the pyramid texts make striking reference to the light makers, quote unquote, and that extraordinary description may have referred to a body of people responsible for lighting the subterranean areas of their complexes. Iamblichus recorded a fascinating account that was found on the very ancient Egyptian papyrus held in a mosque in Cairo. It was part of a 100 BC story by an unknown author about a group of people who gained entry to underground chambers around Giza for exploratory purposes. They described their experience. Quote, "We came to a chamber. When we entered, it became automatically illuminated by light from a tube being the height of one's hand, approximately 6 inches or 15 centimeters, and thin, standing vertically in the corner. As we approached the bulb, it shone brighter. The slaves were scared and ran away in the direction from which we had come. When I touched it, it went out. We made every effort to get the tube to glow again, but it would no longer provide light. In some chambers, the light tubes worked, and in others, they did not. We broke open one of the tubes, and it bled beads of silver-colored liquid that ran fastly around the floor until they disappeared between the cracks. Could this have been mercury? As time went on, the light tubes gradually began to fail, and the priests removed them and stored them in an underground vault they specially built southeast of the plateau. It was their belief that the light tubes were created by their beloved Imhotep, who would someday return to make them work once again." End quote. So it was common practice among early Egyptians to seal lighted lamps in the sepulchres of their dead as offering to their god for their deceased to find their way to the other side, unquote, quote unquote. Among the tombs near Memphis and in the Brahmin temples of India, lights were found operating in sealed chambers and vessels, but suddenly exposed to air extinguished them or caused their fuel to evaporate. Greeks and Romans later followed the custom, and the tradition became generally established, not only that of actual burning lamps, but miniature reproductions made in terracotta were buried with the dead. Some lamps were enclosed in circular vessels for protection, and instances are recorded where the original oil was found perfectly preserved in them after more than 2,000 years. There is ample proof from eyewitnesses that lamps were burning when the sepulchres were sealed, and it was declared by later bystanders that they were still burning when the vaults were opened hundreds of years later. The possibility of preparing a fuel that would renew itself as rapidly as it was consumed was a source of considerable controversy among medieval authors, and numerous documents exist outlining their arguments. After due consideration of evidence at hand, it seemed well within the range of possibility that ancient Egyptian priest-chemists manufactured lamps that burned, if not indefinitely, then at least for considerable periods of time. Numerous authorities have written on the subject of ever-burning lamps, with W. Wynne Westcott estimating that the number of writers who have given the subject consideration as more than 150, and H.P. Blavatsky as 173. While conclusions reached by different authors were at a variance, a majority admitted the existence of the phenomenal lamps. Only a few maintained that the lamps would burn forever, but many were willing to concede that they might remain aligned for several centuries without replenishment of fuel. It was generally believed that the wicks of those perpetual lamps were made of braided or woven asbestos, called by early alchemists salamander's wool. The fuel appeared to have been one of the products of alchemical research, possibly produced in the temple on Mount Sinai. Several formulae for making fuel for the lamps were preserved, and in H.P. Blavatsky's profound work, Isis Unveiled, the author reprinted 2 complicated formulae from earlier authors of a fuel that, quote, "when made and lighted, it will burn with perpetual flame, and you may set this lamp in any place where you please," end quote. Some believe that the fabled perpetual lamps of temples to be cunning mechanical contrivances, and some quite humorous explanations have been extended. In Egypt, rich underground deposits of asphalt and petroleum exist, and some would have it that priests connected asbestos wicks by a secret duct to an oil deposit, which in turn connected to one or more lamps. Others thought that the belief that lamps burned indefinitely in tombs was a result of the fact that in some cases, fumes resembled smoke poured forth from the entrances of newly opened vaults. Parties going in later and discovering lamps scattered about the floor assumed that they were the source of the fumes. There were some well-documented stories concerning the discovery of ever-burning lamps not only in Egypt but also in other parts of the world. De Montfaucon de Villars gave his fascinating account of the opening of the vault of Rosicrucian Christian Rosenkreutz. When the brethren entered the tomb of their illustrious founder 120 years after his death, they found a perpetual lamp brightly shining in a suspended manner from the ceiling. Quote, "There was a statue in armor, a robot, which destroyed the source of light when the chamber was opened." End quote. That is strangely similar to the accounts of Arab historians who claimed that automatons, those were the robots, automatons guarded the galleries under the Great Pyramid. A 17th century account records another story about a robot. In central England, a curious tomb was found containing an automaton, that's the robot, an automaton that moved when an intruder stepped upon certain stones of the floor of the vault. At that time, the Rosicrucian controversy was at its height, so it was decided that the tomb was that of a Rosicrucian initiate. A countryman discovered the tomb, entered and found the interior brilliantly lit by a lamp hanging from the ceiling. As he walked towards the light, his weight depressed the floor stones, and at once the seated figure in heavy armor began to move. Mechanically it rose to its feet and struck the lamp with an iron baton, destroying it and thus effectively preventing the discovery of the secret substance that maintained the flame. How long the lamp had burned was unknown, but the report said that it had been for a considerable number of years. Comment. In the book The Cave of the Ancients, the Tibetan Lobsang Rampa talks about these kind of lamps. This is a short extract. Quote, One sequence of pictures showed a group of thoughtful men planning what they termed a time capsule, what we call the Cave of the Ancients, wherein they could store for later generations working models of their machines and a complete pictorial record of their culture and lack of it. Immense machines excavated the living rock. Hordes of men installed the models and the machines. We saw the cold light spheres hoisted in place, inert radioactive substances giving off light for millions of years. Inert in that it could not harm humans. Active in that the light could continue almost until the end of time itself. We found that we could understand the language. Then the explanation was shown that we were obtaining the, quote, speech, unquote, telepathically. Chambers such as this, or time capsules, were concealed beneath the sands of Egypt, beneath the pyramid in South America, and at certain spots in Siberia. Each place was marked by the symbol of the times, the Sphinx. We saw the great statues of the Sphinx, which did not originate in Egypt, and we received an explanation of its form. Man and animals talked and worked together in those far-off days. The cat was the most perfect animal for power and intelligence. Man himself is an animal, so the ancients made a figure of a large cat body to indicate power and endurance, and upon the body they put the breast and head of a woman. The head was to indicate human intelligence and reason, while the breasts indicate that man and animal could draw spiritual and mental nourishment each from the other. That symbol was then as common as the statues of Buddha or the Star of David or the crucifix at the present day. We saw oceans with great floating cities which moved. I'll leave a link below for you, for this is Bibliothèque Pleiades, and that's the end of our description having to do with the lost history of the Cairo pyramids.